Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you to our webinar today, Undervalued and Over 50, looking at the aging workforce and the potential challenges and opportunities inherent in tackling this area as an employer and as an employer of choice. As our two case study guests today will be demonstrating, there is a great deal that we can do to engage the over 50 workforce. So I'm really delighted. I'm Jennifer Liston-Smith from My Family Care, Director Head of Coaching and Consultancy, and I'm really delighted to have with me today a couple of guests that we've worked with quite a bit on this subject, and I know that you're going to get a great deal from the content that they're sharing today. So I'm very glad to have with us Alison Hughes, who's Head of HR Policy and Diversity at Centrica. So Alison is Group Head of D&I, has had 10 years already at Centrica, is responsible for the delivery of the HR policy and the diversity agenda across the group at Centrica, so no mean feat. And Alison was previously at Scottish Power and Pacificorp, and indeed, and now in Centrica with the new chief exec and a new business strategy, we know there's a great deal of importance being placed on taking this agenda forward. So you've got a lot happening under your remit at the moment, Alison, haven't you?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jennifer, and it's great to be here.
Thank you very much, Alison. Also a great pleasure to have Claire Ball from Age UK, Diversity and Inclusion Manager. So Claire's responsible for integrating equality, diversity and inclusion across all areas of Age UK's culture and practice as an employer. So Claire's key focus over the last 1 to 2 years has been the development of Age UK's Extending Working Life and Planning for Retirement programme, which Claire's going to talk to us about today. But it includes some really key building blocks around flexible working, supporting working carers, health and well-being, financial planning, flexible transitions towards retirement. So we're going to hear about Age UK as an employer, but as we're also aware, Age UK is a huge influencer and campaigner around age generally, and Claire, prior to joining the People and Performance Department in 2013 at Age UK, led on equality, diversity and inclusion in Age UK's services division, supporting a national network of equality and diversity practitioners and working in partnership with local Age UKs to develop inclusive and accessible services. So Claire, you've kind of seen every side of this and been deeply involved in making positive change happen.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Jennifer. And very good. Good morning, everyone. Very good to be with you and looking forward to a really interesting discussion on our topic this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. So My Family Care is hosting this webinar today as part of our commitment to helping make work and family work. And we're delighted to be able to share case studies from a client such as Centrica, who's looking at the whole ageing workforce agenda, but within it, working particularly with carers, and that's an area, because we're all about work and family, it's an area in which we engage with a lot of leading employers and provide a great deal of services, both online services through our work and family space platform, practical services such as backup care, both for childcare and for adult dependents, and a great deal of consultancy, training, coaching, HR mentoring and support. So we're engaged with a lot of the leading employers in this area and in other areas around work and family. So as part of that, we provide thought leadership and partnering to the HR community on topics that are kind of key and top of mind, which is why we're here today. So the agenda for this topic is the why, what and how of an ageing population. We're going to run a poll to find out what the issues may be from your point of view. A little bit of unpacking of what we know already on this topic and putting it in context. And then, of course, turning to our employer case studies from Centrica and Age UK and finding out exactly what our colleagues have been doing on this matter that hopefully you can learn from. But do engage with us along the way. If you have got initiatives already in place and you want to talk about those, please do type into the question area. If you want to chip in as the discussion's going and saying, you know, you can also do this or that, here's a good idea, do take the opportunity to type that kind of thing, which I can read out anonymously, as well, of course, as questions that you may have. And we'll check in on questions a couple of times during the webinar, including at the end, when we'll focus on some of those questions that you'll type in as far as we can respond respond to them today. So the main piece, of course, is those unpacking of the main building blocks from Centrica and Age UK. But turning to yourselves first, what are the issues for you in this area? We'd like to launch a poll for you to give us your view on that. Well, I say we'd like to launch a poll. Actually, the way the webinar is set up, BrightTalk is a wonderful provider. We love the ease of running these webinars, but the way the system is displaying on the screen has just changed recently, and I think I'm not going to launch the actual poll. So I'm going to ask you to type in instead, what are the key interests or challenges for you in this area? Is it, for example, retaining skills? Is it tackling the issue of age discrimination? Is it embracing the challenge of a multi-generational workforce, health and well-being, or all of the above? Or is it indeed something unique to you or something that's not on our list? If you would like to type that in, we will pick those up in the question area in about a quarter of an hour's time. So do please feel free to share the issues from your point of view, and then we can really treat this as a dialogue. So just looking at what we mean by the ageing workforce and kind of summarising some of the key points, which I guess will be clear to many of you because you're here since you're engaged with this topic. But we know that the number of people between 50 and the state pension age is rising. We know that 1 in 10 workers across most industry groups are already aged over 60, and the over 50s is an increasingly large group. We know that there has been quite a poor record on retaining the skills of older workers, and in some sectors in particular, finance, public administration, ICT, see a huge drop-off of people between the kind of late 40s and 60s. So that's a sort of state of the nation based on the information that's out there, including government-generated statistics. Actually, it's worth mentioning there was an excellent policy document produced and released by the CIPD, the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, in May, so just last month, May 2016, a UK policy briefing around carers, and quoting a great deal from the work of Baroness Ros Altman, who has led the way in looking at the drive to retain, retrain and recruit older workers. So there's a great deal of recognition out there that not only is the workforce aging and that there's a kind of bulge in that aging sector of the workforce, but there are positive things that can be done and positive advantages to retaining that group of people in the workforce. And we're going to come to those in some detail and really practical detail. But before we do, what are the perceived issues? When you ask people, what are you worried about in terms of the over 50s, then we are going to elicit normally these kinds of things. People over 50, are they looking towards retirement? Perhaps we should be helping them with that. But are they winding down? Are they disengaging? Could there be health issues? Well, just over 40% of people in the 50-plus bracket do have an ongoing health condition. It doesn't necessarily mean that it impacts on work. But might there be sickness absence? That's one of the top-of-mind things that often comes up in relation to this group of workers. Age is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. Do we have to make adjustments? Well, only if there's a condition that affects day-to-day ability and would be classed as doing so under the Disability Discrimination Act. So not necessarily, we start getting into assumptions here that because somebody is in a particular group, they are going to have particular needs, which doesn't necessarily follow. Menopause and andropause. There was a wonderful, there are a great deal of guidelines. Unison has guidelines, all sorts of trade unions and bodies have guidelines. There was a wonderful position statement in December last year, which was published in Maturitas, the journal of the European Menopause and Andropause Society. And they were talking about very simple practical things such as giving women control of the heating in offices because of the potential impact of hot flushes. And all of the guidelines that are out there talk about raising awareness. But there's also concern when people think about the over 50s about integrating a multi-generational workforce. How do we do that effectively? Will older workers be resistant to change? Again, kind of prejudices and assumptions coming out there. And then finally, on the whole caring piece, really important to take account of, people will perhaps be involved in grandparenting, increasingly so given the cost of childcare in some cases where families are lucky enough to have grandparents living nearby. Caring responsibilities, obviously a particular priority as people get older. The presence of aging parents, aging dependents is just more likely to be there, and many people are sandwich carers with older relatives and their own children or grown-up children on the scene. So a lot of issues come to mind when we first broach the topic of the over 50s. And then there's the other way of looking at it. Lorraine Ladish, founder and CEO of Viva 50, as one exemplar of the positive message around being over 50, talks about actually, it's a kind of coming of age. When you get to 50, there's the possibility of recognizing that you've kind of become who you're going to be. You're no longer in that phase of life of perhaps trying to prove yourself or trying to work out who you're going to be. And there's also perhaps a benefit to understanding that life is finite and that, goals need to be prioritized, and there is perhaps, to some extent a limited time to achieve things, although life expectancy increases. So there is a positive spin to say, actually, there is a way in which we might just be viewing life differently and in quite a focused way. And then we can turn those issues on their head and say, well, if we take those same bubbles, instead of labeling them with rather worrying points, people preparing for retirement are one more group in the workforce looking for flexibility, and that's a part of that whole conversation about better ways of working. People over 50 are often looking at legacy as well. Instead of winding down, what can I give back? There's often a lot of interest in actually passing on knowledge, and that's where losing workers from the workforce can be a huge issue. Places like Newcastle University are looking into the healthy aging phenotype. So while we're top of mind thinking about health concerns, there's a deal of practical advice out there about staying well in later life. Absence patterns, well, they don't tend to be necessarily more. They may just be different. Fewer short bursts of absence may be present in the older workforce. So there may be a kind of steadier attendance records. Also, that whole idea of whether or not we need to challenge assumptions where it's a protected characteristic in terms of age. And all of those protected characteristics, one of the purposes that the Equality Act serves is just to challenge our assumptions about how accessible all of our policies and services are. And actually, many older people are not somebody that need to be accommodated. They're rather people that can make a huge contribution. And one of the best pieces of research I've seen was the study in McDonald's restaurants in 2009 with Lancaster University Management School, which showed that the presence of a worker over 50 in a restaurant was strongly linked to a 20% higher level of customer satisfaction in those places because the person was working as acting as a role model and so on. That change of life brings wisdom and perspective. Generational diversity can lead us to mentoring up and down through the organisation in a really positive way. And people having care responsibilities often value work hugely. Alison will talk more about this, but if we can accommodate people, then there is often a very, very high level of engagement going forward. So just wanted to tip those potential issues on their head before we proceed with looking at the initiatives that can be put in place. So we're going to turn now to Alison Hughes from Centrica and Claire Ball from Age UK. And turning first to Alison, just a little bit, if you wouldn't mind, about how the demographics drove the need for a focus on this age group of workers within Centrica.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, so in terms of our employee demographic, we've got around 40,000 employees across the world. The majority of them are in the UK, so we've got about 24,000 people in the British Gas brand. So that's probably the brand that most people will be most familiar with. Across our business areas, it's pretty consistent. but across Centrica as a whole, we do have a high proportion of employees in Generation X. So many of these people will be in that 50 plus sort of age bracket and sort of classed as we say an older worker. So we've got 4 generations in the workplace today. I think we're just going to see a slide there come up. Yep, that's it there. So as I said, 4 generations in the workplace. We can see across, as I said, that pipeline, that 55% there, that's the Gen X people. So whilst we don't have, in terms of, say, over 60s, we don't have huge numbers at the moment, I think for us it's that looming population that, in the next 10 years or so will be falling into that 50 plus band. So we really need to be thinking now about how we retain those skills and how we transfer the skills and knowledge of these people. In the past, we've had engineers who, once they do get that bit older, maybe have health issues that they're not able to do some of the roles that they do. There's some heavy manual roles, and in the past we've been pretty successful in being able to redeploy our engineers. We've got a lot more people coming through now, so that's not always an option. So really for us it's about how do we retain that knowledge, so using people for mentoring, things like that, but really, how do we retain these people, because we don't actually want to let them go. But aside from that, we also have turn it to our contact centres where we see issues around ageing through eyesight. We have through hearing loss, we have people on the phones constantly. So it's not just for our field workers, it's for people in the offices as well. So we've got these challenges, and as people are staying in the workplace longer, these are things that we're really needing to think a lot more about. So it's really around, for us, that demographic profile. It's that Gen X that we really need to focus on. Also looking at how the different generations work together in the workplace is important. But as I said, it's very much about retaining the skills and knowledge. In terms of our gender splits there, you can see 29% female, 71% male, not untypical of of our industry. If we do look at other, specific parts of our business, and I'll pick the engineering side of our business, it's 90+%. I think it's about 98% male, 2% female. So we have a job there as well in terms of increasing that representation, but also supporting older females in that part of the business.
Thank you very much, Alison. Great insight there into the demographic drivers at Centrica. Turning to Claire Ball from Age UK, how does it look from your end, Claire?
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Well, I think looking at the age demographic of our workforce in Age UK, we are a much smaller organisation than Centrica, working in the voluntary sector with approximately 2,400 staff, and this is across England we're talking here. So looking at the age profile of our staff, we started to do some more detailed equality and diversity profiling a few years ago now, and we found that in fact we already have a significantly aging profile in our workforce, with 46% of our staff aged 50 and over already, which is actually very positive. Of course, that's a very positive finding for us as Age UK, as the largest organisation working for and with older people in the UK. So for us, it's very much about thinking how we are working with our employees internally in a way that's very closely aligned with our external mission and focus as an organisation, which is around enabling people to get as much out of their later life as possible. So it's very much about how do we look at the issues for our staff and our employees, linking to our organisational mission around later life and preparing for later life, and recognising that, of course, our working lives are a very important part of that. So thinking a little bit more about the kind of organisational split, we have a significant proportion of our staff are employed in our retail division. We have a network of approximately 400 shops around the country, so that accounts for 50% of our workforce, and actually in that division the age profile is a little bit older than the general, so we have just over 50% of our workforce in the retail division would be over 50. And the gender split is interesting. I mean, it's almost the mirror opposite, actually, Alison, of your gender profile of the workforce in Centrica, as you might expect, perhaps, given the different natures of our business. We have a very predominantly female workforce, with 76% of our employees are women across the whole organisation, but in the retail division that's also significantly higher, with just over 80% of our workforce in retail being women. And as we know, both the voluntary sector and the retail sector are perhaps more typically dominated by women, a female workforce, so that's not atypical of the two sectors that we're perhaps comparing ourselves with. So I think for us as Age UK, it's very much thinking about along similar lines as you've outlined, Alison, in the case of Centrica. It's about how do we ensure that we have as positive an experience as possible for colleagues of all age groups, but particularly focusing on the 50 plus age groups of our employees, a positive experience of work for the years, for as long as we would like to extend our working lives as possible, and how do we ensure that we can use the policies that we have within the organisation as part of a toolkit, if you like, for employees to have the choices and option and as much control as possible about being able to extend their working life while managing work-life balance, so looking at the importance of flexible working, for example, as an important tool to enable employees to manage their working life.
Great. Thank you, Claire. I know we're going to come back to that in some more detail soon. So just a quick check-in. We polled you as to what the issues were, inviting you to type your points into the question area as audience members. We've had quite a few responses saying all or most of the issues that I mentioned, and other responses saying I'd like to find out about the key issues. People mentioning multi-generational workforce, people particularly mentioning retaining knowledge and skills. So that's a reflection of the audience today. Many thanks indeed for that. Just to say, if you do have questions or other thoughts that you want to throw into the pot, please do send those to us. Do type those in through the question area. We'll come back to the questions at the end of this webinar, or towards the end of our webinar today, to pick those up as far as we can. But do type them in at any time, and we will deal with them either at the end if they're big questions, or possibly as we go if they're a kind of quick point of information. But coming back now to our wonderful case studies, we've talked about the demographic drivers and some of the principles at play. Let's delve a little bit more into the overall drivers. And Claire, I know at Age UK there are kind of dual drivers. There's the mission of Age UK out in the world, and then there is the mission as an employer.
Yes, that's right. So I think the mission out in the wider world, as I alluded to, is very much about enabling people to love later life as fully as possible, and that obviously equally applies to colleagues in the workforce and our own employees. So it's thinking about how do we bring in some of the elements, the sort of tools and the practical approaches that we're applying in our external-facing work with older people in the wider population, and how can we internalise some of that to the benefit of our own employees. I think from an employer point of view, it's really important that we as Age UK are seen to be and are wanting to make sure that we are sort of leading our practice in this field, so that we are enabling and supporting our employees to be able to extend their working lives as far as possible. We are definitely very keen to ensure that we retain the skills and experience of midlife and older colleagues, and that we're able to find effective ways of retaining that experience in the workplace for as long as possible, with the support that people may need as we move into the later phases of our working lives.
So yes, it's both a kind of social and ethical purpose of people should be able to work as long as they wish to work, and people have all sorts of motivations for wanting to work, obviously money, meaning, staying active, staying socially connected. But it's also the employer point of view for Age UK, as well as the campaigning point of view, of saying actually these people are incredibly valuable and they bring huge experience and perspective, and we don't want to lose that. And that's clear as an employer. It's not only the campaigning perspective, is it?
Yes, no, that's absolutely right. And yes, sorry, I was just looking at the slide around our ambition. So that's, very much about aligning some of the issues that we're trying to tackle for older people in wider society. So, for example, the top one there around financial security and tackling poverty and ensuring that people have as much income security as possible in later life. So thinking about that from our employees' point of view, and what expertise do we have to enable people to think about financial planning for later life at as early a stage as possible. So that sort of financial security and obviously health and well-being being another very important area of our external facing agenda and our commitments as Age UK, which we are also looking at how do we improve and enhance the offer, if you like, for employees within the organisation around health and well-being.
Great. Many thanks, Claire. We'll turn to Alison now. So Centrica's strategy is about satisfying the changing needs of customers and employees. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I've talked earlier a little bit about the internal, our employee demographic and what that looks like, and why that's a big driver for what we're doing. But there's a few other drivers as well, and one of them, which is a key one for us, is around customers. So we do a lot of work around understanding our customer base, the needs of our customers, the profile of our customers. So it's very important for us that actually, we understand the link between our external customer base and our employee demographics. So in very practical terms, an example there is we have call centre agents on the phone talking to customers. It's important that if they're talking to an older customer, that they really understand the situation that person could be in. They understand the needs of that customer. So if you take somebody who's younger in the contact centre, who may never have had a mortgage, maybe never paid energy bills, we need to ensure that actually our internal profile, we've got that capability internally to upskill younger members of our workforce, but also to ensure that, through learning from older colleagues, that they can service the needs of our customers. So there's a big link to customers. I think also, and I'll talk about this later, carers is we have a big focus on supporting people with caring responsibilities to stay in the workplace. And that came from a number of years ago. We had some feedback from our employees who had particular caring responsibilities, and we started to look at, okay, how can we support these individuals? What do they need? And how do we help them to remain in the workplace? And I'll come on to talk a little bit more about that later. And I think that the third thing here is around being a responsible business. So from a health and well-being point of view for our employees, again, supporting older workers in the workplace from a well-being point of view is very important. And there's also a link there into the business case as well in terms of, absence rates, attrition, the cost of retraining, particularly for technical roles. So in addition to the ageing population and the ageing workforce, there's a few other very important drivers there as well that contribute towards this agenda.
Absolutely. Many thanks, Alison. So the initiatives that you've actually put in place, let's talk, if we may, about your approach to valuing older workers and the building blocks that you have in place there.
Okay, so we've looked at a number of things, and the first thing, just leading on from the point about carers, where we actually started here was to ensure that we had very, very senior sponsorship for our carers agenda. So it was actually the managing director in our residential business who champions this work, and I think that's been really important to really to raise it up the agenda. I don't think we could have done some of the things that we've done without that sponsorship. It's enabled a lot of credibility from a business point of view, so it's not being seen as the latest HR initiative to be kind of pushed out from the centre. It's had some real business focus. And certainly our sponsor, when he's talking to more of our field workers, our operational workers, if they're hearing it from the top, line managers in particular, they'll start supporting this. So it really helps to win the hearts and minds there of a lot of the line managers and
Absolutely.
the employers.
Just coming back to the sort of overview for older workers, there are the building blocks around attracting older workers, supporting older workers and carers, the work plus family space, flexible working, returning to work. So you've looked at all angles. I mean, carers we'll talk a little bit more about in just a moment, but you've definitely looked at the whole piece around older workers as well, haven't you, more broadly?
That's right. So some of the things you mentioned there, so around actually how do we attract older workers into our business? So we've looked at a few things. Within British Gas, we looked at our apprenticeship scheme, which in the past typically attracted younger people. So we've done a lot of work around removing, for example, the upper age limits for our apprenticeship schemes. And we've got a few really nice stories where we've got somebody who's actually over 60 and has come in as an apprentice. And in the past he did something completely different, and he retrained. He obviously had passion, and he retrained through our apprenticeship scheme as an engineer. So that's a really good message, and we now see quite a varied age range come through our apprenticeship scheme. On the other hand, our graduate programme, we looked at that, and we also seek to include more mature graduates through that programme as well. And then a couple of other things to kind of pull out there as well, flexible working. And I think this underpins everything I've talked about. I think just that giving people that ability to balance work. So, often that's what people need. It's not, formal programs or anything. It's more just that informal flexibility to balance the, work alongside their personal life. We don't always get it right, and I think there's a lot more we can do. We've had a big focus on line managers and really making sure that they get this, so that it's consistent across the organisation. It's one thing to have the glossy policy, but if that's not kind of working in practice at a local level, then that's something that we need to address. Also looking at a lot of our roles. Really challenging the business to look at them more flexibly. An engineer can work flexibly, somebody in the contact centre can work flexibly. And we've got some good stories around one of our, I think it's our Cardiff contact centre, started a recruitment campaign to actually invite people in, and they set out the hours they want to work, and then the business kind of put that into the mix, and it really helped people get the hours that they wanted.
Fantastic, thank you, Alison. And what I'm taking in particular from that, which may be certainly a good message for our audience, is it's not only about doing the right and effective things, it's about making sure you're telling the stories about them. So it's great to have somebody who joins as an apprentice who is a little bit older, and to make him into a role model and promote him as a positive role model is another piece which is really vital.
Definitely. So
Thank you. So could we move on to just hearing about Age UK's essential building blocks now in the approach to enabling employees to love later life? Claire, coming back to you.
Yes, certainly. Well, we've developed a program which we've called Extending Working Life and Planning for Retirement. So we were wanting to find something that really described, does what it says on the tin, actually. And thinking about the age profile of our staff, we wanted to think about a sort of life course approach and actually planning around perhaps key transitions in people's working lives, and thinking about other issues that have a bearing in the rest of their lives. So we've gone for the Extending Working Life and Planning for Retirement approach. So this was a program that was launched in Age UK last year, and similarly to Centrica, we have very strong leadership from the top and buy-in from our senior directors in the organisation, particularly from our chief executive, who can see very clearly, the links to our overall mission, obviously, as Age UK, but also our influencing director. And again, that's about the alignment with our external policy key influencing positions, and of course our HR director, people and performance director. So this is a really important across-the-board initiative for us in Age UK. So thinking about some of the key elements, as I said, we're thinking about key transitions and kind of life planning, sort of personal development and life planning approach. So initiatives like the midlife review sessions and retirement planning seminars have been critical sort of building blocks for the program, and I'll say a little bit more about those in a minute. Also, similarly to Centrica, we're recognising that given the focus on midlife and older colleagues, there's a really important piece of work to be done here around supporting working carers. So we have also similarly started to develop internal staff carers groups and to develop that sort of peer support network within the organisation, and just highlighting and raising awareness of some of the issues that are affecting colleagues, particularly as we move into mid and later working life. So supporting working carers, key element. Also the approach around flexible working, which we also have perhaps some slightly similar challenges in different areas of the business, where we know that flexible working can be a little bit more difficult to introduce in some areas. For us, the retail sector has been a particular area where we've needed to think of some quite creative approaches to enable flexible working, where we've got shop managers who are responsible for ensuring that they keep the shop open 6 days a week with very few employees, and mainly a volunteer workforce. So flexible working, yes, and health and well-being, as I've already touched on, and the other piece is then enabling managers so that we do get the consistency of approach across the business, and we are just starting to develop that training piece now to ensure that we can roll this out and develop it as a consistent approach with a common understanding of what we're trying to achieve, really, and the kind of culture that we're trying to achieve across the organisation.
Absolutely. So there are various aspects of this, which, as you said, we're going to pull out a little bit more. But I guess one of the things that will strike the audience is it's a very well-developed strategy. You're not trying to fix everything with one solution. You've stood back and thought about a whole range of different pieces.
Yes, that's right. And I think we will develop, obviously these need to be developed over time, and some areas that we focused on in year one, we'll be trying to emphasise and further develop and tailor and improve those in years 2 and 3 going forward. So it's definitely a long-term commitment, and we will see the programme evolving and developing over the next few years.
And I guess, again, which would hold true for both of you, the presence of sponsorship and buy-in and indeed championing at the highest level is what is going to allow the resource and focus on this kind of thing, isn't it? Because this is a weighty program. It needs some real energy behind it, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, no, I completely agree with that. And I think actually, what's interesting for us is that we do absolutely have the support and engagement, and particularly, as I mentioned, from colleagues in our policy and influencing department. So it is quite interesting that we have been out and about, influencing and trying to engage with other employers and with government and so on around this policy agenda for some years, and talking about the importance of the ageing workforce and employers' practice in relation to older workers and so on. And actually, it wasn't until more recently that we've actually been able to shine a spotlight on our own internal practice as an employer, so that we can actually start to more confidently, platform and use our own experience as a bit more of a sort of working case study, really, rather than having to refer to other employers all the time. So it does feel as if it's a really important area in which we're actually bringing together our internal practice as an employer with our external positioning.
Yes, quite an important message to be an exemplar there.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Claire. Coming back to Alison, let's talk a little bit more about networks. You've talked about the focus on carers, and I know the Centrica Carers Network is an absolutely outstanding model of success. Networks as a whole tend to be very good. Some people call them employee resource groups, or there are other names around how you would create points of focus. I think few people would have an older workers network. It may suffer from, lack of motivation to join it if you give it a name that people may not want to buy into. But a carers network is often much valued, isn't it, Alison? Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Centrica approach to carers with the Carers Network at the heart of it.
Delighted to. So I've touched on carers briefly. So back in 2005 it was, we set up our Carers Network, and as I said, that was directly linked to employee feedback. So it's quite a nice link there to the business, responding to that feedback from a group of carers. And it was a small group at that time who were working carers. There was a gentleman who cared for his wife, and then there was another gentleman who cared for his disabled daughter. So they joined forces and started the Carers Network. And that's really gone from strength to strength. And I think one of the reasons there, in addition to talking about sponsorship, is the fact that it is truly employee-led, supported by myself and my team, but it's the chair of the network and the people in the network who are responsible really for, take the credit for that sustaining, being there 10 years later. So the Carers Network, it's had a direct impact on how carers are supported. And an example there is our Carers Leave policy. So it was a direct result of the Carers Network that we implemented Carers Leave. And our Carers Leave policy provides up to 1 month paid leave in a year, and that's matched paid leave. So, for example, somebody could use up to 2 weeks holiday, and we would provide 2 weeks matched paid leave. That wouldn't all be at the same time. It's typically planned leave, so it would typically be where somebody is aware of the person they're caring for going into hospital or coming out of hospital. It doesn't always have to be planned, and people would typically take a couple of days. So if somebody took 2 days from their annual leave, we would match that with 2 days. So it can be split into days. It doesn't have to be taken as weeks, and there's no service requirement there for carers leave. So that's a policy that we've had in place for some time now. It was a direct link of feedback from the Carers Network, and it works very well for us. People often ask me, how do you manage that policy? Is it open to abuse? And actually, we've got the data, we've got the stats, we know how much carers leave people typically take in a year. It's not the full 2 weeks. It tends to be 3 to 4 days leave. That people take, because actually people who are juggling that balance, they want to remain in employment. They're very grateful for the support, and actually they want to be here. So we've certainly not experienced any abuse of the system there. But what our carers often tell us is the carers leave is fantastic, and that's great if you need it. It's fantastic to know that that's there, but often what they need is flexible working. So I can't talk enough about making this work, and often it's it's short term. It's maybe somebody needs to change their start time for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So it's really that common sense approach and being flexible. And as I said, we're working hard with our managers to really implement that consistently. We've also got executive sponsorship. Our network is now on Yammer, so that enables us to share information very, very quickly. It enables the organisation to get feedback very quickly from our carers. So that's been a really useful kind of use of technology, and that's what we're looking at. How can we support the network more through the use of technology? It's across the UK and a number of locations. So actually, how can we help them to join up more? We've also got the Centrica Work and Family Space. So again, that's a resource for working parents and carers. And what we like there is the fact that actually it covers the whole family, because typically a lot of our people will have childcare and elder care responsibilities, and it gives them the opportunity to access that information in one place. So there's a lot of things that underpin the Carers Network, but I think that certainly sits at the heart of what we do. And we've also put in a number of metrics. I talked about carers leave and how we've monitored that. If we look at who's actually taking the leave, gender split 65% female, 35% male. So there are a lot of men, and being a male-dominated business, you would tend to expect that, but it's not all just females. 50% were engineers, so again, nice to see in that part of the business, which, historically hasn't been as open to flexible working, but actually, people are taking the leave. And, I think caring's it's not something people choose, it's sometimes something that happens to people. So again, it's nice to see that culture change in that part of the business. Again, across age groups, it's interestingly, it's not all older workers. There's a relatively even split across the age groups, and we've actually got a gentleman in our graduate programme who cares for his mother who's taking carers leave. So again, it's nice to see that being applied across all the different generations there. So there's certainly some interesting metrics there.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's really interesting insights. I mean, of course, flexible working and supporting carers are both matters that span across the generations. You don't have to be over 50 to be interested in either of those. And actually, that's quite a positive that when we're attending to, any minority or any particular group or any protected characteristic and improving things for that group's perceived needs, insofar as you can lump the group together, then we are usually producing results that benefit the whole workforce. I think that's one of the things that comes through. But Claire, turning back to something that is very specific to people in midlife, the midlife reviews and the retirement planning, it would be lovely to hear a little bit more about those.
Yes, certainly. Well, perhaps sort of chronologically, if we start with the midlife review, this is an initiative which is, I think it's fair to say, we're still in the early stages of developing this within Age UK, but we are drawing on a lot of really good experience from, it was initially a government-supported programme, a national pilot programme around midlife career reviews at the time, and there's a lot of very interesting learning that's come out of the evaluation of that initial pilot, which we are now keen to explore and apply in Age UK. So the idea is that it's a half-day session run by a very experienced facilitator who was involved in actually the original development and design of the National Midlife Career Review. So small groups of colleagues who self-identify. So obviously we're not in the business of putting any particular age ranges and limits around this, but broadly speaking, it's aimed at colleagues who would self-identify as being in kind of midlife or mid-working life. It's a very interactive session exploring some of the issues. What are some of the kind of issues, maybe some of the challenges that are affecting people at this stage, perhaps in relation to their working lives and careers, but perhaps also thinking about what's going on in one's wider life. So that may be about one's own perhaps family, relationship dynamics. It may be health and well-being issues, it may be caring responsibilities. So it's very much a holistic approach. And so we're developing that now, as I say, with quite small groups of colleagues, but the feedback has been very positive, and I think what people find most inspiring and useful about it is it's simply the opportunity to take time out. It's just half a day, but to take that time out in the workplace, to be able to reflect on where we've got to, what are some of our aspirations, what are some of the things that we might want to change a little bit as we move forward, thinking about a sort of 20-year perspective, if you like. It's very much a life course perspective. So we've got some very positive sort of early results from that, but it's definitely an element of the programme that we're keen to develop further in this second year.
And it's interesting, it comes up also, again, in the CIPD UK policy briefing published last month. In Denmark, as a fine example of some wider work going on, there is an initiative called the Senior Conversation, and the CIPD says this is something you may want to replicate in practice, although possibly the name wouldn't transfer to the UK. But that's the same concept of actually, instead of pretending, that everybody's life course runs the same whatever age, to actually say, let's sit down, let's look, let's plan ahead together. And use that as a very positive thing. And it's great to hear people have received that positively and really engaged with it.
Yes, Yes, no, and we're very keen to develop it further, and we're thinking about how we can use it as quite an important sort of entry point, if you like, for colleagues who are perhaps in midlife, mid-career points, so starting to think about then signposting across to some of the other elements of the programme, particularly around health and well-being, but also the financial planning piece as well.
Yes.
So it's all very well, coming along to a pensions briefing or clinic when perhaps you're in your late 50s, but actually if we can roll these initiatives back to younger cohorts of colleagues, then obviously we're getting that sort of longer term perspective and engaging people at an earlier stage to really think a bit longer term about kind of planning for later life.
Brilliant. And talking of which, the retirement planning seminars, I think, have also been a great initiative, well received, haven't they?
Yes, these have also been very, very positive. We've extended these. We've actually engaged a significantly greater number of colleagues, still relatively small, but we've engaged almost 100, well, just under 90 colleagues in the programme in the first year. So again, I mean, very engaging, sort of interactive, participatory one-day seminar. And I think what's interesting about it is, again, the emphasis, it's a holistic sort of approach, and the emphasis on kind of life planning, particularly around kind of key phases of transition where you might be contemplating, some quite major changes from working life into some sort of flexible transition towards retirement, however we would define that. And we know that retirement itself is a very, very much changing concept now, with people sort of making it up for themselves, essentially. And there may be elements of part-time employment, there may be elements of self-employment, there may be a significant element of volunteering, there may be all sorts of different components to what we could loosely think about as retirement. So I think one of the things that people have found really helpful around that is actually just exploring sort of attitudes to work, in fact. What is it that we get from work? And if we are thinking about making that transition towards retirement, what are the elements that we would want to replace and retain, and how would we do that, in making that transition towards a flexible retirement, however we define that. So that has been very positive, and I think people have also found it very kind of empowering and enabling, and we have some anecdotal evidence that actually it is already achieving quite a shift in terms of our colleagues' own attitudes towards retirement, that previously there might have been some evidence of, what we might characterize as a little bit of a sort of head in the sand kind of mentality or approach, and actually people are thinking, well, no, there are some choices I can make, there's a lot more information out there, there are a lot of things that I need to think about, and actually people are engaging with it in a very positive way and finding it quite enabling and empowering. So some of the outcomes are really quite positive at this stage.
Thank you, Claire. And actually, as we begin to round off our event today, we're hearing a great deal about the positives for the individuals and what they're taking from it. And just returning to the strategic drivers for the organisation in terms of return on investment, what would you both say to summarise what you're getting from this or what you're achieving through these programmes as an employer? So, Alison, for Centrica, how would you sum up the return on investment?
So I think this is a really important one for us. I think just that business case and benefits and being able to really prove that. The energy industry, is under a lot of challenge at the moment. So there's a big focus on cost efficiency. So we really need to be able to demonstrate that actually, there is a return on investment for what we do. There's a natural cost there to providing carers leave. As a large business, we're able to support that. Smaller businesses may not be in that position, but again, we need to be able to show the benefits there. So there are some benefits around. We've fought hard to be able to get some demographic information in our employee engagement surveys, and we've been able to prove some softer measures through that actually, our carers are an engaged population. They consistently score higher than non-carers in that survey. And again, we've got some data around retention, and we're not aware of anybody having to leave because they've not been able to juggle that balance between work and care. But I think also putting some numbers around this, and we've worked hard to look at some areas where we could do that. So certainly around retention, we've been able to put some projected costs there around, what this can save us. And if we think of some technical roles like an engineer, there's very, very high, there's a lot of investment goes into recruiting and training engineers. So, we don't want to lose people because there's a massive cost there to re-recruit and retrain. And also around absence and demonstrating that actually, through supporting working carers, giving them that time where they may need to take time off to think about their own well-being, that actually there's an impact on absence rates there. So we've been able to put some pretty hefty projected savings there, which is always good to build into that business case.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, those are phenomenal achievements in terms of engagement and retention as well, given your demographics. So thank you very much for that encouraging insight, Alison. I think it's probably very motivating for people listening. Claire, at Age UK, what's the ROI? I mean, you've regaled us with a lot of extreme positives, but how would you sum it up?
I think really at the moment what we're looking at is in terms of the improved satisfaction levels, motivation, morale, engagement of our employees, which obviously we would hope would lead into, higher rates of retention. We already have some quite positive feedback, particularly from our sort of 50 plus, 50, 60 age cohort of staff around, which suggests, higher levels of engagement and satisfaction and intention to remain with the organisation, over the next few years. So we do have some sort of soft kind of data, if you like, on retention levels, but we need to improve our management information and tracking in those areas. But I think so for us, it's very much about engagement, motivation, morale, positive experience for our staff as we are thinking about mid and later stages of our working lives and preparation and transitions towards retirement and into later life, which for us, obviously, as Age UK is very much aligned with our external mission and purpose. So for us, it's about the aspiration to really demonstrate our exemplar employer practice in this area in alignment with our external mission.
Absolutely, and we can see in terms of influencing a lot of quotes from individuals who have talked about the positives, the ability to stay at work, the ability to work part-time, or, I can just carry on working, and the way that you've been able to get those stories told at a very high level. A picture of David Cameron there, for example, listening, which is always a good level to be working at.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Great. Many thanks indeed, both of you, for both unpacking the programs that you have in operation and telling us about the results at an individual and an organisational level. There's a little summary there around what employers could or should be considering. It's backed up by a great deal of government advice, CIPD, policy briefings and so on, to say let's look at all of these areas, how we recruit and how we retain people across the workforce. The diversity of our workforce continually coming up in studies as something that contributes to the bottom line, contributes to return on shareholder investment. And here's just another aspect of diversity. We heard from Alison earlier about, if you've got people who understand your demographics of your customers, they are going to be able to make better decisions. So there's a lot that we can do, whether it's training managers in awareness, whether it's providing services around health and well-being, enabling flexible working, which is good for everybody and good for business. Just turning to a couple of questions here. So one of the questions that I see is if I've got very little budget, where do I start? What can I actually do? So Alison, would you have any tips on that?
Okay, so I think one of the simplest and most effective things to do, to really understand is, certainly my experience is through employee networks, to really engage with staff, so whether it's carers or whether it's older workers, to really find out what the issues are, actually getting a network of people together to really understand what those issues are, in addition to the business issues, and to really learn from employee networks as well, because quite often there's things that the business isn't aware of, hasn't thought of, and I think they can be really, really powerful. I think it's important that they are employee-led, and certainly what we're currently doing is really encouraging the networks to be business-focused. So, the Carers Network's great. We all get why it's a good thing to do, but actually, if the network can also demonstrate how it supports Centrica to achieve its strategy through inclusive working practices, then that just gives it some extra credibility and buy-in from the top. So I think there's some things like that, and that doesn't cost anything apart from people's time getting people together, but no kind of direct financial input required there.
Wonderful, thank you. So the network can provide a source of insight as well as a source of support going forward. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. Further resources are available. There's a download of an employer's guide to supporting working carers, which, as we've seen, is an element of looking after the ageing workforce or older workers. So you can download that. Do ask us about any other services. Alison kindly mentioned the work and family space, which My Family Care provides to Centrica as one of the building blocks of the services there. So if that's something that might be helpful to your workforce around parents and carers generally to help combining work and family, that's something that we'd love to tell you more about naturally. One more question, Claire, just to finish. Will you carry on with the programme in the future, or is it just a pilot?
No, we will definitely carry on with the programme. We will extend it and develop it as, moving forward. We're always looking at the sort of total, as I alluded to, a sort of life course approach. We're always keen to look at the whole of our employee journey, if you like, and the experience for staff at different ages and stages of both their career with Age UK, but their working life overall. So no, we're very committed to continuing to develop this programme as part of our commitment to supporting midlife and working into later life, which we know is a key national issue and is very much a challenge for all of us.
Absolutely. Many thanks. That was clearly going to be the answer, given the wonderful commitment and influencing power of Age UK. So many thanks indeed to Alison Hughes of Centrica and Claire Ball of Age UK for joining us this morning. Thank you all for attending and engaging, and we wish you all the very best in implementing some of the solutions in this area. Bye for now.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.